Всем привет. Продолжаем React. Сегодня как минимум state and props. Минимум state and props. Дальше посмотрим. The last lesson was a lot of theory, but there's just a little bit more you have to learn in order to write your first React application. If you have done all this stuff in the previous lesson, you should now have a great foundation for the concepts you will learn next. Make sure to pay close attention to this lesson because it covers two of the most important features in React. Let's dive right into it. Feel free to code along with the lesson. Typing the code out will help you remember it significantly better. You should be able to demonstrate how to pass functions, state, or other values between components as props. Describe the purpose of state in a React component. Explain the importance of using setState instead of mutating state directly. Differentiate between class and functional components. Class functional components and the syntaxes with which they use props. Demonstrate how to attach event listeners to elements in React components. Nice. The previous lesson you learned a lot about concepts and how to structure your application in a React Web. How do you share values or even functionality between those components? Yes, you guessed it right. The answer is props. Props are one of the two major pillars of React. The answer is props. Share value or in functionality between these components. Yes, you guessed it right. The answer is props. Props are one of the two major pillars of React. The very heart of what the framework was built on. Let's take the following example. After superprops render. What happened here about there are two components, my component and app. As you can see, my component is imported into app and then rendered as a child component of app. The JSX where we implement my component, we also pass down a property called title. The syntax should look familiar to you. In the same way we assign attributes to HTML elements. In this specific example, we assign a prop short for property as an object property called title, which we set to the value React. My component, we can access this prop. In my component, we access this prop from within my component with the syntax this prop title. This technique is called passing props. Whenever the syntax is prototyped, this technique is called passing props. But make sure you pass props to the constructor of the child component my component as well as the super method, otherwise you will not be able to access this prop title my component. You might be confused by this keyword since you may not yet have encountered it, but don't worry. For right now, it's enough to just know that you must use it for your React component to function correctly. If you're really curious about what super actually does, я помню, это keyword is used to access properties of an object, literal classes prototype. This super prop and super expression are valid in my method definition in both classes and object literals. Now you might be wondering how props work with functions. Believe it or not, they work the same way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Button. Oh, there's a little bit more going on here, but in the end it works exactly as in the example before. First, there's my component, which is essentially the same except one key difference. Is assigned to the one-click event of the component. Essentially, what this means is my component is expecting a prop to be passed into a name on button clicked. The value of that prop should be some kind of function. We want this function to be attached to the click event or of our button. Special note 1. In React, instead of using add event listener to add event listeners, we assign them right in the just section. Like adding them in HTML, these attributes must be camel cased. Supported events here. Do you notice how the function this prop was wrapped in the curly braces? And this is because JSX needs a way of knowing when you are using JavaScript, otherwise it will try to transpile your code into HTML elements, text, nodes, or strings. or through an error in some cases. In this case, we are referring to a JavaScript object property which technically qualifies as used in JavaScript, so we must wrap it in curly braces. Now on to the app component. First, we define the method onClickButton. About the render method. After that, we passed this function down to our component as a prop. Я потерял. The prop which we named on button click, of course. You could also name it on click button, and then use it function in my component.js with the name of on click button. But we wanted to emphasize that you can rename the functions when passing them around as props. Ой, черт, я запутался. It passes a value previously accepted instead of passing a string, which is passing a function. Using curly braces to do so because JavaScript variable. Now the only thing we have to do is bind the method to this. We do that in the constructor method at the top of our component, but below the super call. Let's understand the reason behind this. The JavaScript section, learn that this keyword refers to the object that is belonged to. However, the value of this can change depending how a function is called. When you pass a function from one component to another, content this changes. It is no longer refers to the original component. This can cause errors and unexpected behavior. To solve this problem, we use the bind method. By calling bind on the method and passing it the component this keyword, we create a new function with this bound to the original component. This ensures that the method is always executed in the correct context, regardless of where it is called from. So always remember, you must bind this for all methods in class components. Other components, as you can see, you're pathing many properties or functions to a component. It can get quite exhausting to always refer to them with structure and title on button click from this process, which let's refer to them with just their names. Make sure to this structure within the random method when using class components. In functional components, you would destructure outside of the return statement or inside the parameter parentheses of the functional component. More on those later. Or inside of the parameter parentheses. Great, hopefully have better understanding of the purpose of usage props in React. Not too shabby. At this point, if you are feeling overwhelmed on threads, or once you start using props in your project, you'll understand them much better. Soon enough, you'll be a props master. State. Another main pillar of React is state. So it is simply what we use to handle values that can change over time. For example, consider a very simple application that has a button and a counter. State. State is simply what we use to handle values that can change over time. For example, consider a very simple application that has a button and a counter. When the user clicks the button, the counter is incremented by 1. Since count will need to change on every click, we want to hold the value on state. The following example of our simple counter app shows how to define state in React. This state count. This count up. Mm. Did this set state the keyword refers to the object that is belonged to, where the value of this can change depending on how a function is called. They pass a function from the component to another. Change depending how the function is called. When you pass a function from one component to another, the context of this changes and no longer refers to the original component. This can cause errors and unexpected behavior. To solve this problem, we use bind method. By calling bind on a method and passing it the components, this keyword will create new function with this bound to the original component. To ensure that the method is always executed in the correct context. Must bind this for all methods to another components. A function that is bound to the original component. This ensures that the method is always executed in the correct context, regardless of where it's called from. So let's remember you must bind this for all the methods. Да. Component. Так. In the above component, we declared our state as an object with a property count set to an initial value of 0. We declare our state as an object. State as an object. Value always declare the state in the constructor of a class component. Always declare the state in the constructor of class component. Again, this will work differently when we cover functional components later. The set state method we call inside the count up method says the state to a new value. The set state method we call inside the count up method set the state to a new value important. In React, state should be treated as immutable. This means you should never change state directly without using set state because it can lead to unexpected behavior or bugs. Okay. In other words, you should never do something like this. Instead, always use set state method. React provides to class components to modify this state. To update the state of the React component. This state, new name. Set state. Okay. Applies to class components to modify this. Keep this in mind. It can save you a lot of debugging when you are getting started with React. This article does a great job analyzing many popular JavaScript methods concerning mutability. This takes some time to read it so you can understand how easy it can be to accidentally mutate state. Please note there is one mistake in this article. In the last coding example, mapping onto ORICAR would not result in the modified string suggested. Rather, it must this limited array would be contained an n value. Values. Так. Очень не грузит. As mentioned before, our countUp method needs to be bound in a constructor using bind, so it knows what context to operate in. This is a result of how this works in JavaScript. See this article for great explanation why this in the case. So we need to bind event handlers in class components in React. Хочу и читать, учитывая, что классы я вряд ли буду использовать. Access the current state through this state count. In the render method, we access the current state through this state count. Access rows, you can also add the structure state. Okay. We need to bind event handlers and class components in React. Like in React, you must have come across control components and event handlers, but we need to bind this method to the component instead using bind instance using bind in our custom components constructor. In this card, we're going to find out why we need to do this. I would recommend reading about bind here if you do not already know what it does. Blame JavaScript not read. Well, laying blame sounds a bit harsh. This is not something we need to do because of the way React works or because of JSX. This is because of the way this binding works in JavaScript. Let's see what happens if we do not bind the event handler method